Here comes some freezing air diving down into the plains and out east for Halloween. And multiple snowstorms look to be in store for the Midwest and potentially even for the East Coast as we move through the first 2 weeks of November. We may also be dealing with the return of some severe weather as we push through the first week of November. It's October 31st, 2025. Let's get into the weather updates. Most of the country is dry right now as they wake up on Halloween, except for the Northeast, and this will likely linger around as we get into the late hours. I do think you're going to be okay along the coast, like I said yesterday, but in New England, it could be a little bit of a cold and rainy Halloween night. Unfortunately, as we move through the day, we're also expecting a lot of rain and wind to move into the Pacific Northwest. This is going to drop some snow at the higher elevations, but for the lower elevations, it's mostly just going to be cold rain. Our weather pattern across the states is really starting to take a turn towards winter. You'll see a lot of dips in our jet stream moving forward here, and it's not just the GFS and American model seeing this, it's also the European and the Canadian. As we get into tonight and November 1st, you can see that first push of cold air diving down. Now, this is at the 850 millibar level, so this is just above our heads, but this is a good way to look at where the cold air is being displaced because it's not as affected from the daytime heating and nighttime cooling. So here we go, pushing through the first few days of November. That cold air dives down into the plains and then out to the east. We get a little bit of a warm up or a little bit of a zonal flow, so a return to averages, potentially a little bit above average for much of us across the country. But then again, we get into the 6th, 7th, and 8th, and here we go, some more cold air trying to dive down into the states. These are these wobbles in the jet stream that we talk about as we get closer to winter, especially if we have an unstable polar vortex, which in a La Nina, you typically do have more opportunities to have a destabilized polar vortex. So this is through the 8th, the 9th, and then as we get into the 10th and 11th, this right here would easily, hands down, be the coldest air that we've experienced since last winter. This would be, I think most people would label this as an Arctic outbreak. We have freezing temperatures at the 825 millibar level, almost reaching down there towards the Gulf. And with it, this could also bring a very intense snowstorm through, who knows, the plains, could be up through the Ohio Valley, potentially even up through the Mid-Atlantic and New England. Again, this is near the end of the run, so we need to wait and we need to see if we get more model consensus. We kind of call this la la land, but you're seeing the consistency in these wobbles in the jet stream and these collapses of our polar jet to the north. This is another interesting way to look at what's ahead. This is our 500 millibar height anomaly map, and you can clearly see these troughs lining up out there over the Pacific, beginning to move down into the states. Here's our first one as we get into the 6th and 7th, and then the 8th and 9th. Look at this. You have 1, 2, 3, and then what's happening out east? You're starting to get a little bit of that negative NAO blocking. What happens when you get blocking up to the northeast here? Well, you get your cold air sticking around, lingering, and you get a better storm track. It is interesting seeing this kind of negative NAO blocking. And then at the end of this run, also, you have that Alaskan ridge we always talk about. As we push towards the end of the European run, we see something similar trying to set up here. A little bit of Alaskan ridging and negative NAO blocking. And of course, these models don't completely agree, but look what's happening on the Euro as well as we get into November 14th, 15th. Again, kind of la la land, but when you see globals start to agree on a pattern of significant amplified troughs entering the states, sometimes it's best to pay attention to that pattern because more often than not, you'll tend to see a version of that. Maybe it won't be as cold as projected, but maybe it will be. Our European model, just like the GFS, as we get into November and as we push through mid-November, is trying to line up these storm systems off the Pacific, many of which want to dive down across the eastern U.S. Now, we'll see. Right here, if this were to happen, this would actually be some decent cold air and potentially snow for the west. Again, we'll watch as this progresses, but a lot of these systems do look to focus on the east, at least through the first couple weeks of November. And by the way, we are ahead on ice coverage up here to the north. This ice up in the Arctic actually allows for the transfer of cooler air down into the states. This was last year, October 31st, and you can see we have a little bit of gap in this ice here. Watch as we move forward to this year. There we go. We're actually filling in this ice a little bit ahead of time. So this combined with our weak La Nina could also mean a little bit more cold air transfer earlier in the season. Now, I want to take you through our next 2 weeks. This is the 00Z GFS, and I'll tell you the 06Z GFS just came out, and it actually may be even more aggressive, but we do like the 00Zs and the 12Zs. We will take a look at the Euro after this as well, but moving forward here from the latest, like I said, 00Z GFS that came out last night, here we go, a little bit of cold air moving in for Halloween. We know that low pressure system is moving out of the northeast, and here comes our storm system into the Pacific Northwest. All right, now we're into November 2nd. Things start to get interesting. A little bit of a low pressure system forming down here that may try and skirt up the coast, bringing a little bit of moisture down here to the southeast and potentially up through the mid-Atlantic. Models can't seem to agree on that yet, if this is just going to kind of meander down in the Gulf or if it's going to try to move up the coast. Anyways, here we get into November 3rd and 4th, and we get potentially a little bit of snow, flurries flying up in the air up in New England. We have a little bit of a push of cold air and another low pressure system moving across the north northern tier states. We're still seeing that funnel of moisture up into the Pacific Northwest, but notice over the last few days, not a ton of rainfall in the center of the states. That's likely going to change though. This is as we get into Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of next week. Here we go. Another push of cold air for New England, Michigan, portions of the mid-Atlantic, a little bit of a mixture in snow and rain. This is likely just going to be snow for the higher elevations or northern inner New England, and we're continuing to see these storm systems slam the West Coast. Again, this is as we get into really the middle to end of next week. And then here we go. Next weekend, Friday, Saturday, and then as we get into Sunday. This is a very interesting time period because both models do show this somewhat amplified trough diving down into the northern Rockies, northern plains, upper Midwest, bringing with it a lot of rain on the front end, potentially some severe weather, and potentially some snow on the back end. You can see here as we move back, this could end up being a snowstorm for portions of the Dakotas, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. Now, each model run, this system is either farther north, a little bit farther south. It keeps kind of moving to the north and to the south, but it's consistently showing up, and it's consistently showing up now in the European as well. So what I can tell you is next weekend, we're going to have some sort of winter storm out here. Will it just end up skirting through Canada to our north, or will it actually dive down like this? Well, the models have consistently put some snow into the Dakotas and Minnesota and northern Wisconsin. So it's definitely something to keep our eyes on, especially if you're out in this region. And again, like I said, severe weather chances next week, I think, greatly go up. And then here, as we get into the end of that weekend, guess what? This cold air and moisture transfers out east. Again, this could be more snow for the Appalachian Mountain Range. And what's right behind it? If you're a winter lover, you love seeing this. Another storm system. Here we go. More cold air diving down. This may dive down a little bit farther out to the west, but again, this could be more snow for the northern plains, upper Midwest. Another severe chance down here through Dixie Alley, pushing out towards the East Coast. This could even end up being a Tornado Alley severe threat, depending on where this trough enters the states. And then look what happens on the back end of this. The air is so cold on this run of the GFS. We're actually getting some snow down through portions of eastern Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia, and western Virginia, really up and down this Appalachian range. It's not impossible to get low elevation snow with this if the air is cold enough. And then we continue to move forward, and more storm systems, more collapses of this polar jet. Here comes some more snow potentially for Nebraska, Wyoming, and then pushing out through the Midwest. Again, end of the run, kind of la land. Let's take a look at our European real quick and see if it sees this very active winter-like pattern moving forward. In the short term, it sees the same thing. Much of the states is dry, except for the Northeast and the Pacific Northwest. You can see there, it does try to take this low pressure up the coast, just like the GFS. So most things are pretty similar here through November 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. As we get into next weekend, now this is when the GFS sees potentially a big snowstorm for portions of the northern plains and Midwest. Here's what's happening on the Euro. Its trough is not as amplified. Here's the storm system that the GFS sees. Well, the Euro has this low pressure system a little bit farther off into the northeast. It does have this cold air diving in, but you can see this trough isn't as amplified. Getting into the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, this la land that we're talking about. As I said, the Euro actually sees what the GFS sees. Large amplified trough pushing into the states and potentially a big snowstorm for portions of the Midwest and plains. There's our Euro right there. And then again, if we push back into our GFS, here's the storm system a little bit farther behind actually on our GFS, but a little more amplified. So the Euro GFS, they are seeing some similarities in this active winter-like pattern here with storm systems. And by the way, we can look at the Canadian as well. There we go, cold air diving into New England early next week. And then the Canadian kind of has a combination next weekend of the GFS and Euro. Here's our storm system. Here's our cold air a little bit farther to the north, but it does see another potential snow system right behind that. So it's seeing this active pattern as well. Last but not least, I did quickly want to get to severe weather. Now, with some of these storm systems and with some of these potential amplified troughs diving down into the states, we will have the opportunity for some severe weather. Here we go. As we get into next weekend, we could see a setup through the plains, and then this would end up transitioning out through Dixie Alley and out east. But look at this jet streak here that we have on the latest GFS run. Nice southerly flow off the Gulf. This is going to be very cold air from the north. So this is something to watch out for next week. I think we could have a few days in a row actually of severe weather. If we were to move forward a little bit farther in time, you can see that shear transfers off into the east, and then we potentially see the opportunity for another severe weather event here through. Right now, it looks like this would be more of a Dixie Alley event, but again, this is something we have to focus on. You have that nice southerly flow. We're going to have warm, moist air out ahead of here and potentially some dry, cold air behind. This is a recipe for severe weather. So I'd say as we get into the 6th through the 10th time frame, we want to watch out for some severe weather out here. I'll keep you updated, obviously, as new information comes in. I appreciate you guys watching this video. I upload content like this every day, and I try and stream at least 5 days a week to answer all of your weather-related questions. If you like this type of content, don't forget to follow or subscribe. It's a huge help, and I really appreciate it. That being said, I'll see you in the next video or the next live.